With Rot Blood Promise, you can permanently curse yourself with temp chains. Now why would you want to do that? Well, this build uses it to greatly extend the duration of a bunch of very strong but normally temporary buffs. With a little flask charge generation, we're able to have automatic full uptime on all our flasks using this enchant. We also get permanent charges with this weapon implicit combined with Trickster's Swift Killer. The 200% increased charge duration means each charge will last for over a minute, and since their duration refreshes every time you gain charge, they'll essentially never expire unless you get really unlucky. Now with so much duration, we can also just run a Vol Aura on our left click, cause it's an instant cast and we'll have it up pretty much all the time during maps. Cause it turns out, our temp chains extends the duration of the aura, but since it's not an actual duration modifier, it doesn't affect the soul gain prevention. That means there's a window of like 15 seconds where you can get souls and recast the Vol skill while it's still active. Also, we have a Divine Blessing up all the time since we have all that duration. They last like a minute, so you'll only need to recast them like once or twice a map. I run 2 blessings that I swap between, Haste for speed and Anger if I want more damage on an essence or like the map boss. Kinda like a stance change, that way I don't really need to think about recasting too much, and don't worry, it feels pretty smooth cause we get a lot of cast speed from our buffs. We get 3 seconds of adrenaline from our boots, which we extend to roughly 8 seconds with our temp chains. With a 50% roll on the item, we also extend our ward recharge timer to 8 seconds, which is also the cooldown of a crafted trigger mod on our weapon, which we use to trigger Forbidden Right to hit ourselves to break our own ward as soon as it comes up. This means we get full uptime on adrenaline. And since we're consistently hitting ourselves, we also get permanent onslaught from this essence mod on our body armor. Between these 2 buffs, we get 45% attack, cast, and movement speed, 100% increased damage, and 10% fizz damage reduction. We also get a really long duration Immortal Call that we proc every 8 seconds with cast when damage taken using a self hit from Forbidden Right. With 3 endurance charges and an anomalous gem, it should come off cooldown roughly right before our Forbidden Right procs again. It also turns out Rampage duration is extended too, so we can use a weapon swap at the beginning of the map and have it up until the end without having to worry about it falling off when you pick up items. So we're scaling temp chains through a combination of this helmet, ring, and some jewels. We want a total of 210% curse effect to fit with our 8-second trigger cycle for adrenaline and Immortal Call. Don't get too much though, cause you can't gain adrenaline while you still have it, so if it's still up when you proc Forbidden Right, you'll either have it down until the next trigger or it gets procced by an enemy and everything gets thrown out of sync. Same with Immortal Call. Now, I'm not sure how ping dependent this is, but 210% works well for me. You can do some testing to see if you ever don't get adrenaline when your Forbidden Right procs or if there's a big gap when you don't have adrenaline. Just keep casting Blazing Salvo or Shield Charge or something when it's about to cycle. You can bless your helmet implicit to get things exact, and also don't forget to account for the -20 from Rot Blood itself. The skill I chose was Blazing Salvo. You can probably use this template with any other spell, but I can't guarantee your results. So Blazing Salvo shoots a bunch of projectiles that explode when they hit either an enemy or the ground. Since it's a projectile skill that also does area damage, we can use Pinpoint and Intensify, which helps our clear wall mapping and gives us a big single target boost when we need it. By the way, with Blazing Salvo, where you stand and aim are actually important. The further away you aim, the wider the projectile spread, so you want to aim farther away for better coverage, and you want to get up close for a single target so you can shotgun all your projectiles. Also, the skill actually has a minimum travel distance, so you can't just stand right on top of the enemy, there's an optimal distance to land most of your projectiles. So as a Trickster, we enable self-curse temp chains with 1 step ahead. The reason we don't just use Forbidden Jewels as like an assassin is because the Trickster ascendancy gives us a lot of defense and quality of life. Also, we really need the jewel sockets. The charge duration allows us to easily maintain all our charges, most notably the 5 frenzies that we now have. Polymath gives us all the sustain we'll need in maps, and Heartstopper just straight up gives us 40% less damage taken sometimes. I was originally using Soul Drinker for more speed and ES sustain for our Eldritch Battery, but after I made the swap, the difference in survivability was very noticeable. Also, turns out we can sustain enough ES to cast just fine with a little ES leech from Essence Rush on our cluster. Aside from all the buffs from Self-Curse, we pretty much scale our damage like a normal caster. Flat damage, percent damage, crit, cast speed. We get Arcane Surge, Exposure, and Unnerve too. They all have a low proc chance, but we cast fast enough that it's not really an issue. Sniper's Mark is also a big damage boost for us. Not only does it give 40% increased damage taken, it gives us 4 extra projectiles which all have the potential to shotgun. However, I'm not sure how many projectiles are consistently hitting, but some more AoE could help with that. We're also building around Leadership's price, so we'll need a little ailment effect too, but we pretty much lose half our damage without it because the Brittle and Scorch are huge. I should also note getting sources of double damage is really strong for builds that scale ailments, because whenever you proc the double damage, your applied ailment will be much stronger. And with a decent chance for double damage, you can keep up the stronger ailment on them permanently if you cast fast enough. Leadership's price also gives us the ability to sap, which reduces incoming damage by up to 20%. Combined with all our defensive layers, we get really tanky. Due to our location on the tree, we can easily have 100% spell suppression. Ailment immunity is a bit trickier, but you're definitely gonna want it. We're immune to freeze and chill from our ascendancy, but we still have to figure out shock and, more importantly, ignite. With a juiced up temp chains on us all the time, things like ignite last way too long. I'm getting some ailment avoid and suppression with elegant form on a megalomaniac. If you can't find a usable one, then you can run a flask with one of these suffixes. Bleed and poison are also really annoying, but they're a lot rarer. Through a combination of Heartstopper and the Pantheon, you're usually fine. It is a rotating buff though, so you won't always have the relevant part up when you need it, but it ends up mitigating a lot of unexpected incidental damage. We consistently have 3 endurance charges thanks to Enduring Composure, and we regain them pretty quickly after consuming them for Immortal Call. We also get a juiced up Temp Chains aura from the ring itself. Now, combined with Skitterbots, everything near you moves in slow motion. There are 4 mandatory uniques: Rotblood, this, Leadership's Price, and Lethal Pride. They're not really that expensive, but don't think this is a super budget build. Most of the gear will be pretty available, though you'll have to do some crafting. I'm not sure about the exact cost, but you'll probably need at least 30 divines for it to feel good. The rares are quite easy to craft. Something like this is pretty deterministic, though it may take like 10 divines. I'm gonna add notes on how to craft some of the gear in the PoE, but essentially, you just want a good caster weapon and shield, suppression, ailment avoid, chaos res, and life on your armors. Now, it would be a good idea to have an open suffix on one of your gear pieces that you can craft dex on. You need to equalize your dex and int for Leadership's Price, and the easiest way to do that is to have a benchcraft that you can keep re-rolling. The number should be equal to however much int your Rotblood gives. Also, if you're a lower level and need to cut some points from my tree for now, make sure you keep the dex and int equal. This mirrored ring is a key factor in this build. You can make it yourself with the Reflection of Calandra, but you can just buy one. There should be a lot on the market. You don't need exactly 62%, just make sure your total, including everything else, is 210%. Now, the jewels in this build are pretty important. This large cluster gives us Arcane Surge and some ES Leech to sustain our casting. We're always leeching, so we'll always get the benefits. This passive is really efficient. This other large cluster gives us some nice percent damage and some blind action for a little more defense. We're using Enduring Composure to reliably get endurance charges with Immortal Call, and a bunch of Doedri's Apathies for Curse Effect. It would be better to get these on Megalomaniacs, but good ones are kinda hard to find. On the Watcher's Eye, I value the life gain on hit a lot. I would take it by itself over 2 damage mods. The sustain it gives you, especially in boss fights, is crazy. And last but not least, this Lethal Pride is crucial for giving us enough strength for our gems. We don't have to have 159 strength for a level 21 determination, but get at least 126 for a level 5 awakened fire pen so you get exposure. You can get other nice things on these like 5% double damage and regen too. So for mapping, you want to try to move between every cast so you don't build up too much intensity, which nerfs are clear. For bosses though, you want to get close to them and try to get out as many casts as you can without moving, so pay attention to your positioning. It also takes a little time to ramp up our damage, because we need to stack our intensity, ailments, and debuffs. Don't get too greedy though, because you do no damage when you're dead, and unoptimal damage is still better than no damage. Also, you want to stack up your charges before boss fights. If you're impatient, nah, I'm just kidding. You definitely want a pair of these boots. Pay the 2 divines, don't wait like a minute before each boss fight. Just quickly swap them back and forth. If you have auras in your boots, have a copy of them in Ralakesh's in the same sockets so you don't have to recast them. And make sure the links are the same or else it won't work. By the way, if you die, you can do the swap when you re-enter without breaking your grace period. For Uber bosses, I like to use Immortal Call manually because you get a lot more control, and it comes in handy during things like Eater's Inescapable Doom and Shaper's Bullet Hell, so I swap cast when damage taken with increased duration and the low-level Anomalous Immortal Call with a 2120 Superior gem. Also, instead of Vol Haste, I use a Vol Grace manually as essentially a second guard skill, which I use along with Immortal Call during the little Uber minigames. I normally run a Vol Haste in maps, but you can also use a Grace instead for more safety and have Anger as your blessing. I did this for a bit when leveling to 97 because I didn't want to die to a random Ice Nova or DD box when not paying attention. By the way, here's a tip for this setup. If you have a really obnoxious aura MTX, you can put that on your Anger blessing so you can just look at your character to see if you have it up quickly. I normally run a Stone Golem in my trigger wand, but I was experimenting with Tornado for more damage, and it felt fine without the extra regen. I also experimented with different flasks instead of the Granite cause you normally don't take much fizz damage in most of Uber bosses. If you want damage, a Dying Sun with extra charges felt pretty good. The fire mitigation might also be helpful for Exarch, especially the ball phase. For Eater, you might want a Topaz, and in fights like Uber Shaper and Uber Elder, you might want a Sapphire Flask like this cause most of the damage is cold. And for stuff like Uber Cirrus, where there's a lot of random ground degens, you might actually want to just use a Life Flask. So the character I have right now isn't even close to being min-maxed. There are still plenty of things that can be improved. Ideally, you'd want to replace the small clusters with Megalomaniacs, get enough decks on your clusters for leadership's price, that way we can get way better gloves. Like look at these, they're garbage. I can instead get something like this. In fact, all our rare gear can be vastly improved. My weapon is just multi-modded cause I didn't want to risk breaking the suffixes, so you can probably get a crit multi-roll in there too. I don't even have an enchant on it. The mirrored ring, this has the potential to be insane. Can you imagine putting something like this in the thing and you hit positive life gain on hit, multi, and recoup, and flip the curse effect, and mana I guess to lower the cost of your blessing? You can get good corruptions on like your boots or shield, and your Abyss Jewel can have a little stun avoidance to cap us off cause we're sitting at 85% right now, or if you're rich you can build around having a Mage Blood. You can start getting good corrupted gems, a belt enchant, just a lot of things that can be improved on if you think the build's fun enough to warrant it. I'm sure there are things that I missed cause there's a lot going on in this build. Feel free to ask questions, I usually read everything. And if you liked the video, consider subbing, liking, notifications, all that YouTube stuff, that would be pretty cool.